This is Road Gang Radio, and you're riding shotgun once again with Jimmy Mack and Brad Bentley.
You are such a fan of American history, Brad. I've got a guy for you. We've got a whole bunch of folks for you this morning, as a matter of fact. Shawn McGhee, by the way, no longer subjects of the British king, the political transformation of royal subjects to Republican citizens, 1774 to 1776. It's terrific, by the way, and it's up my alley, by the way. I love how identities are forged. I love how people become something. The process of becoming is infinitely fascinating to me. I also got a chance to listen to a podcast that he was a part of at a place that we are actually friends with. He was actually over at, I think it was the Museum of the American Revolution over in Philadelphia. He did an Adventures in Theater History, Philadelphia, episode 98, Curtains Up on Cato, which turned out to be one of George Washington's favorite plays. And then his latest publication, One Great People, John Fenno's Public Crusade for an American National Identity. Do you sense a theme that is building in here? I don't know if you know this, but when Beaumarchais wrote The Marriage of Figaro, the Barber of Seville, the famous Barber of Seville, which is the first play, somebody said, what did he think of the play? And Napoleon said, it's the revolution in motion. And so much of what Shawn writes about, what he is interested in, and he can correct me and tell me if I'm wrong, but it is literally about the becoming of an American in motion. And we are thrilled to welcome Shawn McGhee this morning to, by the way, a big contributor to All Things Liberty. Great to have you, Shawn. Welcome aboard. He, by the way, is, he's got a PhD from Temple University, and we are thrilled to have him. We'll get into your bona fides, but happy 4th of July to you, by the way.
You as well. Happy birthday, United States.
Good to have you. Where would you like to begin there? I mean, I'm here with the president of Fastport, Brad Bentley. We're over here in the city of New Orleans, which has its own steeped history of America, but not the main action. We get into the conversation later with Andrew Jackson. But can we kind of talk a little bit about your obsession with American identity, and I mean that in a very positive way, about how we go from being royal subjects to essentially Republican citizens?
Yeah, I feel that the book that I wrote is an origin story, and it's really difficult to pinpoint, when exactly an American identity takes root. And I remember years ago reading through actually Abraham Lincoln's first inaugural address, where he, and I'll paraphrase here, but he gives the American people the benefit of his understanding of the origin of the United States, and he doesn't locate the beginnings of the American people with the ratification of the Constitution, nor does he recognize the Articles of Confederation, nor does he even recognize the Declaration as the origins of the American people. And he says that the American people started much earlier. They're represented in the First Continental Congress's Articles of Association, which ultimately is what I wrote the book on. And so there is a really compelling argument to be made that we begin to see a proto-national spirit or ethos develop around the Articles and what the Articles were asking for American Whigs during that time of crisis after the Coercive Acts were passed in 1774.
Yeah, and so much of that about becoming, the idea is that people, in order to become something, this is a big exercise, by the way, they make people who are becoming artists of any sort. If you go to any sort of program to kind of study to become an artist, which I think is kind of strange, but they do encourage people to write manifestos, to actually lay out in one way or another who they are and what they are about. And I know you're familiar with Bernard Bailyn's book, To Begin the World Anew, which what I thought of as I kind of read your thing, too, about how identities are forged in communitas. And the idea of so much of this is an ongoing conversation of people borrowing from other people. It's a genuinely, you could make a case that more than any other nation before it, it is one of the most collaborative efforts in world history to forge an identity. A lot more people get a say in what they are going to become than ever have been allowed before. Is that fair?
Yeah, I agree with that, yes.
So can you kind of unpack that, what we become? So let's kind of talk about that for our listeners today, how we go about the business of becoming. Who were we before, and how do we then transform into us? How do we do it?
Yeah, it's quite complicated, but I'll try to give the simplified version here. It seems to me, now this is my interpretation of the evidence after 4-year deep dive into the archives. It seems to me that American colonists were incredibly happy belonging to the political architecture of the British Empire up until 1774. And one of the reasons why is because American colonists were enjoying the liberty that was afforded them by the British Constitution. They were afforded the protection of the most powerful navy in the world. They were afforded the protection of the most powerful army in the world, and they were at liberty to write their own charters or colonial constitutions, if you will. And what we have is a series of identities rather than a singular identity, right? So the political culture, perhaps in Virginia, was a little different than the political culture in Massachusetts, and the political culture in a place like Boston is going to be a little different than the political culture in Springfield, which is that they're still in the same colony, but they're counties away. And there was a real reward in this, right? And so American colonists gloried in being British and having the protection of the British king because it afforded them so much autonomy. Now, we have to remember that no one in colonial America, or virtually no one in colonial America, had the experience of seeing like a royal procession, right? Of seeing the king, of seeing the actual court, of feeling the power of the aristocracy. There were titles in the British Empire, but there weren't any titled men or true hereditary aristocrats in the colonies. And so the starting point would be enjoying much of the bounty of the British Empire, but without really feeling the awesome authority of the aristocracy and of the crown. And when Parliament begins to I guess you could use the word interfere with local affairs, whether that be through taxation or legislation. That's really the starting point. Right in 1764, 1765, we begin to see the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act passed as a means by which to, pay for the roughly 10,000 soldiers that were left on the western frontier after the French and Indian War. And when Americans begin to feel the power of Parliament to do things and that interferes with local leadership, we begin to see, a pretty impressive and remarkable sort of cohesion around resistance that will only grow over the next decade. I think that's a good starting point there.
Yeah, I think it is too. And there's a sense of this is interesting. What is brutal about this is the fact that it's the slap in the face. It's the sudden realization that what you thought you were, you're not. And by the way, I'm always willing to be corrected if I'm wrong here, but it seems like in 1774 in particular, oh yeah, I know you thought you were full citizens with full rights. Guess what? You're not. Was there that sense of, are you kidding me? That moment where you think you're part of the club, and then it's like, no, you're not. You don't have a say in this. You're going to do what you get told. Was there a sense of betrayal? Because that's really what sets off trauma. That's what sets off revolution, is that a people feel betrayed. Is that it?
Yeah, I think you're capturing the spirit of it there, right? And it happens in a microcosm, right? Because we have to remember, most Americans that are like sort of familiar with the revolutionary process are obviously familiar with the mantra "no taxation without representation." And of course, there's a lot of anger over property being extracted against the will of Americans, because no American can vote for any member of Parliament, right? There's an element of political accountability that ties into this story, and if you're being taxed by a local representative, you always reserve the right to vote out of office that local representative. But if you don't have the power to vote for anyone in or out of office, then that's arbitrary taxation. But let me bring this to speed where I want to get. The Coercive Acts crisis was something different, right? So the taxes outraged everyone, and we have resistance to the Stamp Act, we have resistance to the Townshend Act, we have resistance to the Tea Act, right? That's 1764, 1765, all the way up to 1773. But after the Boston Tea Party happens on December 16th, 1773, something truly astonishing happens. And this is the part of the story that's usually not told. The coercive acts or the intolerable acts, they're the same thing. That was a series of punitive legislation that was not designed to extract revenue from any colonist, right? This is something far more dangerous than taxation without representation. This is legislation without representation. So this is perhaps even in a more acute crisis than resistance to taxation. The closing down the Boston port threatened the economic livelihood of the state of the colony of Massachusetts. The new and improved Quartering Act, made people in Massachusetts responsible for publicly supporting the King's troops, whom they didn't want there to begin with. The Massachusetts Government Act, with the stroke of a pen, wiped out local democratic government in Massachusetts, and the so-called Murder Act allowed certain British officials to specifically be tried not by a jury of their peers, but out of the colony of Massachusetts and potentially even in England. So with just a few bills, what we see happen is Massachusetts is effectively erased. Political culture is effectively erased. Democratic politics are essentially erased, and a military dictator is effectively put in place in Massachusetts, Lieutenant General Thomas Gage. And the remarkable thing is, I don't think anyone was prepared for how quickly the rest of colonial British North America got behind Massachusetts in general, but Boston in particular.
It's interesting, too, because, as far down as Georgia, people are like, wait a minute, hold on 1 second there, which, by the way, those are incredibly different cultures. Anybody knows anything about the Deep South in the colonial period, it ain't the same world as Boston. I also want to point out to our listeners, I just love this stat. Over half the residents of Boston were under the age of 18. Which meant essentially you were cracking down on this radical college campus. And it was literally, this is the question I have to ask you, and maybe this isn't your area, but it seems to me that part of the problem was the place was such a hotbed for activity, such a hotbed for radical thought and discussion, that the British were trying to get ahead of it and were already behind and essentially lit the fuse on what was already a powder keg. Is that a fair assessment? Once again, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I think again you've got your finger on the pulse. We have to be a bit sympathetic to the British High Command. They're always, this is a 4 mile per hour world that we're dealing with, right? And news travels very slowly. So it seems there was a great article, I forget the name of it, by the late great historian John Murren from Princeton, where he effectively drew out like, Parliament seems to always be reacting to things that happened 6 months ago. And so they were always 6 months behind. So whatever was going on at the moment, they weren't reacting to because they were reacting to something that happened, 6 months ago.
It's interesting, too, because Brad and I have been talking about this, and as a person who's moved from what I call a corporate entity to a more of an independent place, I'll tell you the ability to maneuver when you're not a vast bureaucratic system makes things a whole lot easier. And it feels like that even though the colonists did not have the might of the British Empire on their side, because they had more independent thinkers and much less strictures, even though they had their own forms of government, that there was a certain maneuverability when these things 6 months late arrived. They actually had what I would call kind of evasive measures in place and were able to kind of start moving. That the ability to kind of think on their feet, but also the ability of not being hemmed in by strictures at the level the British military was, gave them one of the few advantages they had against British might. Once again, I'm just asking, I really am.
No, that seems right. The communication in the colonies wasn't great either, and that's what I think makes this story like a standout. When people in like St. John's Parish in Georgia, which is one of the more radical parishes in that colony, when they find out what happens in Boston, they immediately mobilize. They immediately condemn what's going on with what Parliament decided to pass to punish Bostonians for the Tea Party. We see the same thing happening in South Carolina, Westmoreland County in Virginia. It's a grassroots uprising. Local leaders were outraged, and I think rightly so, because Massachusetts is the one of the wealthiest colonies. It's a major seaport town. A lot of commerce, a lot of revenue is generated for the empire out of that space. And if the crown can sort of economically crush Boston, this is really a story of what's next, right? Just like the stamp tax, if they can tax us a penny, they can tax us $1. If they can tax us $1, they can tax us, until we don't have any property left. If they can, crush Boston, what's to stop them from crushing New York next? What's to stop them from crushing Perth Amboy in New Jersey, or pick a port, right? And so there's this real fear. And it's that fear that's going to sort of really animate a lot of, fear and anger and outrage. And I think you said a moment ago, a sense of betrayal. I think that's accurate as well. And there is a very rapid grassroots resistance movement that develops. And as I outline in the book, they draft all these local resistance movements. They're sympathetic with Boston, and they also demand a gathering of what they call the Grand Continental Congress.
By the way, there really is a sense too here that plays out, and this goes back to the idea of Americans becoming Americans. At this moment, it's at this moment of maximum danger, which is what you've outlined here, is a moment where people often figure out who they are pretty quickly when everything that they have is suddenly at stake. And that seems to be the argument of 1774 to 1776. We don't have time. If we don't respond to this quickly, then we're going to find ourselves unable to stop what happens next. And so there is like this bull rush in regards to kind of forging an identity. We've got to do this, because if we don't stand for something, we'll certainly get all kind of trampled over. If we don't hang together, we will certainly all hang apart separately. Is that kind of the basic foundation of it? So now we've been pushed against the wall. So how do we go about, in this origin story, in this superhero story, in this alley where Bruce Wayne's parents have been gunned down, how do we become Batman?
These local resistance movements, they create what I call in the book a lexicon of resistance. And if you were to take the time to sort of just read through, from county by county, town by town, pick a handful of colonies, the language is remarkably consistent. The things that they're concerned with are remarkably consistent. And one of the major motivating factors for local resistance is the idea that for generations, the American political culture was as such that no future generation had fewer rights than the present generation. The language is they want to pass liberty on inviolate to their posterity. That means in whole, like they want everything that they have, or more, hopefully more, passed on to the next generation. And if they sit by and allow Boston's port to be closed, and allow Boston's charter to be wiped out, and allow a military dictator to determine whether or not their democratically elected assemblies can meet, that's not passing liberty on inviolate to the next generation. And so that is so what liberty means, right, in like Elizabeth, New Jersey, and like St. Andrew Parish in Georgia, they might not be identical, but they both agree that they work for their local spaces, and they want the right. So it becomes the obligation of the present generation to protect the liberties for the next generation. And so again, there's not a single American identity just yet. And I don't think that there is one now, and I think that's really the beauty of the experiment, right? Is like this sort of local autonomy with a national umbrella, and I think that's sort of what the Continental Congress provides, is a sort of a coordinating committee for the many local resistance movements.
It's interesting too, because we can make a case that the American identity it ain't that. I mean, there's a way you can kind of say that our Constitution is based on the fact that the government can't do that. And there seems to be a sense of we don't know what we are and we're still figuring it out, but what we aren't is a military dictatorship. What we aren't is the coercive acts. And it almost is kind of ironic that the coercive acts become the coercive act that drives Americans into their own identity. In case you guys are just joining us, Shawn David McGhee joins us. He's a PhD from Temple University. He's the author of No Longer Subjects of the British King, The Political Transformation of Royal Subjects to Republican Citizens. He also is an educator in the Philadelphia metropolitan area, an adjunct professor of history at Moore College of Art and Design. The Declaration of Independence, then, in terms of your vision of this, becomes kind of the apotheosis, the kind of the peak point of all of this. Like, okay, we got an idea now, And so much of the Declaration, I ask, does it fall under my idea of we ain't that? That's not what we are, and we're going to choose a different path.
Yeah, I think the Declaration has community building all over it. I mean, the language is never I, right? The language is always like we, right? When it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which has connected them with another, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident. The governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, right? There's community built into the language of the Declaration. And as far as I can tell, the Declaration is many things, but it's three things at the very least. There are three dimensions. One, it's an announcement to the global community that there's a new nation among the powers of the earth. It's effectively a birth certificate. Two, it's a mission statement, right? It's a mission statement of the new American state. It effectively outlines the moral and ethical character of Americans, and it legitimizes private pursuits of happiness. So we have a birth certificate or announcement to the global community. We have a mission statement or the moral and ethical character, and it's also a rationale for the need of an independent America, right? It's effectively revealing. It's really a sort of an impeachment, if you will, of George III. It's a list of grievances, and they're not light grievances. They're actually pretty powerful. So, yeah, the Declaration of Independence is a singular document for sure, but it announces to the global community that there's a new nation. It announces to the global community why there's a new nation, and it reveals to the global community who Americans are at their core.
And by the way, I want to follow this up, and this is me just having a little bit of fun with my words and with your words as well. We talked about that depth of betrayal. So basically what you're suggesting here, and like I said, you can tell me that's not what I'm suggesting at all, the depth of the betrayal the king has actually engaged in of the powers that he has been afforded have essentially rendered the idea of a monarchy null. That his betrayal is so deep, he has actually annihilated his own position.
Oh, yeah. Like there's historiographical debate among scholars about whether or not the Declaration reveals Jefferson's embrace and Congress's support of classical liberalism or classical republicanism. And that's certainly a worthwhile pursuit. But one thing that unites both of those positions is classical liberals and classical republicans were rabidly anti-monarchical. The king has revealed himself to be a true tyrant. I mean, let's just walk through some of the things that they're complaining about, right? Because we get so hung up on taxes, and the Declaration obviously is concerned about taxes. But the king, according to the Declaration of Independence, has abdicated the throne when it comes to protecting British North Americans. He's inviting an expanded local rule or local government for the vanquished French, right? He is allowing Hessian, what they call mercenaries, to come and kill Americans. He's allowing the British Army to destroy and rape and pillage. He's allowing the British Navy to stop trade and effectively deny people access to medicine and food and supplies. This is about military destruction. This is about the denial of a trial by jury of the peers of the vicinage, right? The destruction of free trade, the denial of self-government. Everything that is in the coronation oath that the king is expected to do for his subjects has been turned on its head. The world is upside down.
He has rendered his office moot, is essentially what he's done. And that's another conversation I'd love to have with you at some point about the idea of the psychology of King George III. The idea that since he couldn't exert that kind of power over the people in Great Britain, looking to be a tyrant, he actually found a really great kind of place to practice that craft. He tried it on the colonists as well. I mean, because he never could have gotten away with the stuff he was doing over in the colonies if he had tried it in Britain, right?
Well, there's just when he announces, so George III, like he got a pass for quite some time, but I think that historians recognize now that George III was sort of once a sort of hands-off monarch, right? He was pretty young when he came to the throne. He's 20 or 22 in 1760 when his grandfather dies, George II. But he pretty early on with the American crisis, he flips a switch and he declares colonists in a state of rebellion, and he's utterly hands-on. He's so hands-on that he is on top of asking Catherine of Russia if he can rent some of her army to put down to subdue Americans in British North America. And there's like some sort of little diplomatic embarrassment that goes on there. He never ends up getting Russian support, but he's looking in the Hessian states, right? And he announces before anybody knows, before there's any real conversation, that he's struck a deal with a bunch of the Hessian princes for Germanic support. And this outrages people in England, right? So it's not just Americans. They're people they're British subjects living in in old England are outraged by the idea that the king is going to resort to hiring bloodthirsty mercenaries. Again, they're not mercenaries, but they're auxiliary soldiers. But at any rate, in the popular imagination, like the king has gone so far as to hire hired guns to suppress and oppress fellow British subjects across the Atlantic Ocean. So even in Old England, the king doesn't have complete support for this. But
happy 4th of July, by the way, Shawn. We've got to take off. Shawn David McGhee has joined us this morning, and we're so pleased that he is our first guest up from All Things Liberty and the Journal of the American Revolution. My friend, you are welcome back anytime. Go enjoy a great 4th of July. I was going to ask you what you're doing, but we literally are out of time. Happy 4th.
Happy 4th. Thank you so much.
You got it, man.